Okay, here we are, second to last intervention of the day. Good afternoon again, everyone. You are all troopers. Look at your stamina. My name is Taína Caragol, and I'm curator of painting, sculpture, and Latino art and history, and I'm co-curator with Kate LeMay of 1898 U.S. Imperial Visions and Revisions, and where we received the collaboration, the curatorial assistance of Carolina Maestre, too. And this is a very, I think, an intervention that will be very special. It's different from everything we've heard yesterday and today, but related, of course. We're hearing from artists now, so it's your chance to ask them questions after, and to have perhaps an unmediated interpretation of their work, to have them talk about their own work. These are artists whose artwork addresses the topics that the exhibition brings forward, right? So the conflicts of 1898, the so-called Spanish-American War, or the War of 1898, the joint resolution to annex Hawaii, and actually we don't have any Filipino artists in this panel, but in the next panel, which does address also contemporary art manifestations, will have some representation from the Philippines too. I have to say that as a Puerto Rican art historian and curator, I am particularly fascinated with how these topics have been of pertinence to so many of the artists coming from the lands that were brought under U.S. sovereignty or the U.S. sphere of influence. In Puerto Rico, 1898 is a topic that has been addressed since the very moment that it was happening, as you can see in the work, in the very portrait that starts the show, the portrait of William McKinley by Francisco Oller, which is quite a record of that moment from the perspective of a Puerto Rican artist, and which graces the cover of our catalog. And just looking at how McKinley looks there, you know, you can maybe you can interpret what the artist was thinking, how he felt, because he didn't say how he felt about that moment, but he certainly recorded it, and perhaps there is a certain, you know, perspective that is subtly, you know, apparent there. So the context for these three presentations, the historical context, has been laid out yesterday and today. I don't think there's much more to say. All the presentations we've heard until now will really help us understand the work of these three artists. So I will just proceed to introduce each one of them in the order that they will speak, and then invite them over. José Manuel Mesías is an artist who specializes in painting, video, and installation. The latter, so installation, being a medium for which he often focuses his practice on the object, its found status, and its story. His work reveals both personal and collective histories, finds meaning in the most insignificant objects and the most ordinary crafts. His practice roots itself in both the past history and contemporary context of Cuba. It often looks back to the time of the independence wars in Cuba in the late 1800s, a rare theme in contemporary Cuban art. And he is based in Havana. You will see that through his presentation, he will include documents, historical documents, and also apocryphal, what he calls apocryphal objects, objects that he sort of introduces into the narrative. And there is a beautiful ambiguity about which is which. Pablo Delano was born and raised in San Juan, Puerto Rico. He holds a BFA from Temple University and an MFA from Yale University School of Art. Currently, he serves as the Charles A. Dana Professor of Fine Arts at Trinity College, Hartford, Connecticut, where he teaches studio art. Delano was a founding member of Trinity's Center for Caribbean Studies. Solo exhibitions of his work have been held in galleries and museums throughout the U.S., Latin America, Europe, and the Caribbean, most recently at James Madison University by our colleague Laura Katzman, who curated the most recent version of the Museum of the Old Colony, about which he will be speaking. Did I say that was Lara Katzman who curated that? Okay, and who is speaking in the next panel. Dear friend, he has published several monographs on photography, including In Trinidad by Ian Randall in 2008. Mark Hamasaki earned a BFA in photography from the Rochester Institute of Technology and an MFA, or equivalent, from Allgemeine Gewerbeschule Basel in Switzerland. I haven't done my German Duolingo today, but I said that, so that counts. My streak is on. He taught photography at Windward Community College for 34 years. In 1991, the Honolulu Star Bulletin named Hamasaki as among the 10 people who made a difference in Hawaii, citing him for his efforts to secure from the Hawaii State Legislature $12.5 million for Windward Community College's master plan. In 2015, Aipohaku Press published a 167-page photographic essay, Ē Luku Wale Ē, by Piliāmoʻo, a working collective featuring his and Kapulani Landgraf's photographs. We also invited Kapulani Landgraf, but regrettably she could not be here today. However, I invite you to read Heloha Johnston's essay in the catalog of 1898, U.S. Imperial Visions and Revisions, just to say a little word about the collective work of Piliāmoʻo. Piliāmoʻo is the collective name for photographers Mark Hamasaki and Kapulani Landgraf's shared practice. Deeply rooted in the particularities of place, Hamasaki and Landgraf have collaboratively documented transformations across the ahupuas of Kolaupuoko on the island of Oahu for over 30 years. Excuse me if I mispronounced anything. Including the water struggle of Walaile, Interstate H3, and in Kaneohe, and the modernization of Kailua. Piliāmoʻo's visceral project, Ē Luku Wale Ē, Devastation Upon Devastation, 1997 to the present, makes visible the terminal stages of the construction of the H3 highway and its destruction of cultural, agricultural, historical, and environmental sites of significance. And this is the focus of his presentation today. So, without further ado, please join me in welcoming José Manuel Mesías. Thank you.
Afternoon. First of all, I want to thank Taína and Kate for letting me collaborate with them in this amazing project and all the staff of this exhibition. I want to begin my presentation with kind of an introduction about annexationism. It is important to understand the antecedents throughout the 19th century for what will happen at the end of the century and at the beginning of the 20th century. Sometimes, especially in the most radical and official or officialist Cuban historiography, the American intervention is understood as a surprise, like a lightning that suddenly struck our island. Instead, it's quite the opposite. So, Narciso López, a conspirator of Venezuelan origin, arrived in Cuba in the 1820s and immediately became a fervent conspirator against the Spanish regime. He landed in Cuba in 1850 with the first Cuban flag in what would be the first of three attempts to uprise the island, make it independent, and then annex it to the United States. Here we see how Colombia offers to be part of the Union, offers Cuba to be part of the Union. The Lone Star, so associated with freedom and independence, was intended to be part of the constellation of American states. Narciso Lopez's expeditions and filibustering projects were always supported by the landowners of the southern United States, who were interested in exploiting the agricultural wealth of the island. But in Cuba, he was supported by some patriots in the center and east of the island, who would become the models of several independencies of the 10 Years' War. In the last one, that came from New Orleans, Narciso lands in the west of the island to be captured and then executed after having spent agonizing days on the run, hiding in the caves of Bahia Honda, from where he's taken by the hounds used in the sugar plantations to hunt cimarrones slaves. This painting was being given to Antonio Maceo, who we don't really know if he actually sympathized with Narciso Lopez, by an unknown painter. The painting was a gift given to Antonio Maceo. This very picture, we can see it in the exhibition upstairs. The painting accompanied him to his settlement in Nicoya, Costa Rica, around the 1890, and seems to have been beaten by one of his dogs, perhaps this one in the photo that was called Cuba Libre. And sorry. The representation of the martyrdom of Narciso Lopez is also impacted by the jaws of the Mastiff. History often repeats itself, copies itself, like the term coined by Lezama Lima, a very important writer, Cuban writer. He used to call this phenomenon concurrent randomness. Narciso Lopez becomes one of the greatest anti-heroes in the Cuban anti-imperialist narrative. Narciso Lopez, vivens vivo. Vivens vivo was, in ancient times, as it was attested that the subject had been painted in life. Painted here from memory before his last trip that results in capture and execution, he is telling us that we will have to look at our history with humility because heresy has reigned in our souls. We are mainly responsible for our ruin. The portrait shown at the entrance of this exhibition stops the viewer and makes this demand. San Pedro Martyr, just as Saint Peter the Martyr does at the entrance of the Basilica of the Convent of Saint Mark in Florence. Annexionism must be understood in its context, the first half of the 19th century, trend that declines that declines in the middle of the 19th century and is diluted in the First War of Independence. We can see here how the coat of arms of Cuba that was originally designed by Narciso Lopez at first included symbols of annexationism. We can see the American flag. We can see the bars in the left side of the coat of arms. We can see the 13 stars and also the stars in the hat. We can see how this symbol mutates through the 19th century towards the end of the century and becomes a symbol of independence used by the Cuban patriots. So, we have independence. Leonard Wood passes power to elected President Tomás Estrada Palma. And then the Republic was born with the burden, the tumor that was the Platt Amendment. I will focus in part on how this law influenced the internal politics of Cuba in the first decades of the Republic. Estrada Palma governs in his first 4 years and becomes one of the great heretics as well of our history, the epitome of surrender and submission. Of course, he becomes mostly a heretic in the revolutionary rhetoric and narrative. His monument, built in the 1930s, was destroyed at the beginning of the '59 revolution. He is erased from the El Panteón de la Patria. Now, in this very centric avenue in Havana, we only can see the shoes of Estrada Palma. So, cayó como un 20 de mayo. Cayó como un 20 de mayo, el 20 de mayo, el 20 de mayo de 1902 was the day that the Cuban Independent Republic was founded, and the phrase cayó como un 20 de mayo, it felt like a May 20, is the evocation that a great misfortune has fallen on someone. The clock minted with the date was given by Leonard Wood to Estrada Palma at the time of the power session, thus beginning our time as a nation. I hold this very watch here. I'm using it for keeping time. You can see how noisy it is. And so the clock, the pocket watch, belongs to an installation that I produced in the Havana Biennial. This clock belongs to a collection of clocks that showed 11 pocket watches belonging to different figures in Cuban history from the beginning of the 19th century to the 1940s. Our last attempt to build a true and democratic republic when the Constitution of the 40 was approved. A few still work, like this one, and are related despite different historical contexts. The space, this small wash museum, is a wash itself, a wooden sculpture with an elliptical shape, material, and shape acoustic by excellence, since it was necessary to make it possible to hear the ticking of the clocks that worked, like this one, which is quite noisy, as I said. The ellipse is also an allegory of the deformation of time, of judgments about history. So, the first 4 years of the independent republic are underway, and it is time for Estrada Palma to be re-elected. 1906, we have war again. A small civil war called the August War, La Guerrita de Agosto. The liberals, all veterans of the War of Independence, rise up. The president asks for the intervention of the United States under the Platt Amendment. Yesterday, Ferrer was talking about this particular figure, which is Quintín Bandera, and he is murdered and massacred at the end of this conflict, and we see again the root of more than a political conflict, a racial conflict. How he's massacred along with his assistant, that you see he's very badly caught by machete. So we have another occupation, a 3-year occupation, a 3-year intervention. Uncle Sam has to interfere to settle the unruly kid that is always looking for revolutionary troubles, and is holding in the hand the quiet kid of the quiet nephew of Puerto Rico. Cuba is independent, but is a very tantrum-giving kid. So, 1912, the eagle, the horse, at the amendment again. You see here, this is the logo of the El Partido Independiente de Color. This is a conflict where the independent color party opts for an armed protest when its existence is illegalized. The United States threatens to intervene, and the government of the Republic responds ruthlessly, massively, massacring all the uprising forces, even those who surrender, and black civilians were also lynched. Estenos dies at the hands, Estenos, who was the leader of the party, dies at the hands, says the legend that the government told, at the hands of Lieutenant Lutgardo de la Torre in an unequal combat. Here, kept in a cabinet, are the 2 machetes are kept as war trophies. As you see, Lugardo's machete on the left has the imperial eagle on its handle. This was the design of the reglamentary machete of the Cuban Army in the Republic, which were imported from the US. The horse on Estenos' machete, used in the last war of independence, as Estenos was himself a veteran of the Independence War, is the symbol of the party. Sorry, went too far. Time again. This time, this wash hit by a sharpened weapon. Maybe that same machete that kills Estenos. It has the dedication, gift from Major General José Miguel Gómez. José Miguel Gómez was the president at the time the uprising happened in the Sierra Maestra in 1912. José Miguel Gómez, you see him here on the left, holding the chain of his very own pocket watch, and Estenos on the right. Perhaps the inscription, perhaps an indication of the suspected pact between Estenos and José Miguel Gómez to provoke an American intervention. But we'll never know about this. What we have in the end, the outcome again, the black bodies publicly displayed to frighten the people. Well, the end of my presentation is with this American cartoon of two soldiers playing with the heads of both Evaristo Estenos and Pedro Ibonet, the other military leader of the we know this as the armed protest of the Partido Independiente de Color, playing with the heads, a Cuban soldier from the Republican Army and an American soldier. This is the photo taken at the end of the revolution, and this photo marks the end of the conflict. Monteagudo, head of the army, poses in Santiago de Cuba, with a black kid for the press. We have nothing against black people. You are the racists. But the photo, far from conciliating, is a reminder of who has the power of terror. Y bueno, nada, a manera de despedida, as a way of goodbye, I end with photos from Guantanamo Bay Naval Base that we inherit from the times of the Platt Amendment. Thank you.
I'd like to thank everybody, and especially those panelists who were here yesterday, who I found so much inspiration from that I had to redo my PowerPoint last night to include references to some of the work. As Taína said, I was born in Puerto Rico and had a wonderful childhood in many ways, surrounded by much great beauty. And then I became a little boy, and it was time to go to school. And when I went to school, I learned about these two events and these two dates. And Clara, we forgot to fix this because the dates are supposed to be in white. But in any case, when we came home from school, my friends and I turned on the TV, and we were very much in love with the whole myth that was presented to us on the TV, the American West. And of course, we fully bought into this myth, and everybody sided with the cowboys. Everybody thought the Indians were savages as they were portrayed. And here's a little drawing I did when I was very young. And you can see the indio in the upper left-hand corner. El indio, you know, it was just a little bug, I guess, and whereas the cowboy is in his full regalia with guns and spurs and all the fringes on the jacket. That's what surrounded us when we were children. Colonialism isn't just a historical concept when you live it or witness it. I experienced as a child a heavily militarized post-war Puerto Rico. Even though I came out of this background, as I grew up, I opened my eyes, right, and I saw what was going on around me. A heavily militarized post-war Puerto Rico swarming with U.S. soldiers and sailors, military convoys taking over roads, and heritage sites appropriated and converted to golf courses for the exclusive use of commissioned officers and their families. I became aware of a huge income disparity, with most people living day to day, while wealthy elites held lavish parties at hilltop mansions. I observed the servile manner it was necessary to adopt in order to get a job in the booming tourism industry. And one of the things that we all enjoyed consuming was the soda, which is sweet, artificially flavored, but with a lot of sugar. And guess what? You can still get this today, right? In the oldest colony in the world. So in 2016, the debt of Puerto Rico, the odious debt, was declared unpayable. And as an artist, my work had always dealt with these issues, but I thought it was time to do a more direct approach and to really take this on head on. And the question for me then was how, right? As I looked at the can of the new design of the old colony soda. And so I turned this over in my head around and around and around. I was very interested in history, and I came up with an idea. Right? The Museum of the Old Colony, a conceptual art installation, a piece of performance art, employing a methodology of appropriation. Okay? So what pushed me, right? The best explanation I can give is not mine, but that of Marta Aponte Alsina, who said this in a wonderful essay she wrote about this piece that I'm talking to you about today, the Museum of the Old Colony. According to Pablo Delano, the motive behind this traveling museum, which expands with each iteration, is rage. The anger that in ancient epics gave rise to war. That motive, perhaps the most immediate response to a situation as degrading as the subordination of an entire people to the interest of another, is mixed with what its creator calls humor, an understandable nuance. So what do I appropriate? Photographs taken by others, texts written by others, objects created by others, moving pictures, footage, and newsreels. And I appropriate the premise of the museum, the institutionality of the museum, as an authoritative beacon of knowledge, taste, righteousness, power, and beauty. Appropriation to take ownership over the very tools that were used to oppress us in order to expose them and turn them back against the oppressor by recontextualizing them. As a child, I was taken to museums, such as the Museum of Natural History in New York City. These memories suggested to me that the complicity of museums and of media in the process of othering and reinforcing white supremacy. I understood that museums hold power and that every decision made about how museums are configured is informed by systems of power and class and race and politics, So I decided to appropriate some of the language of museums, such as vitrines. So what do I try to do? To reclaim, to subvert, to empower, to decolonize, right? To liberate, to mock, to recontextualize, to provoke, to agitate, to interrogate. So I'll show you a few examples. For a long time, I was interested in collecting the imagery of how we were seen by the outsider, by the colonizer. And I'll start with this image, which you've seen yesterday in the presentation, right, by Dr. Olivia Gonzalez. And so I find this caption, which is the original text included with the photograph. The photograph, as Olivia said, is by a very interesting character, Margarita Lena Ham. The captions were often not written by the photographers, but I won't read it because it's too hurtful, but I'll just stop a minute to give you a chance to read the original caption. So I wanted to place that image in conversation with classical art for many reasons, right? I thought of classical art, the water bearer, and I looked and looked and looked, and I found this commercial reproduction of a Roman copy of a Greek sculpture, which happens to be in the Vatican Museum. And so I put the Puerto Rican laundress in conversation with this figure, who turned out to be a Deniad, who in Greek mythology condemned to spend eternity carrying water in a sieve or perforated vessel. In the classical tradition, they came to represent the futility of a repetitive task that can never be completed. All right, so I'm looking at subtext and hidden narratives that we could explore if we had more time today. And this is a more recent from a more recent series, which is not part of the Museum of the Old Colony, but since it employs the photograph, I thought I would include it. I'm inserting here the object directly into the picture. Yesterday, Ada Ferrer showed us this image, and I thought immediately, well, here we see the U.S. Maine arriving in Havana Harbor. Here we see the children waiting for Uncle Sam, who hasn't quite arrived yet, right? So I'll show you an early version of the Museum of the Old Colony. This is an installation at the Museum of Contemporary Art in San Juan, and we'll jump to some photographs from the latest installation, which is at James Madison University, curated by Laura Katzman, who also edited the catalog, which you can get on Amazon and many other places. Going a little bit fast, even though we have little time, I'm still going fast because what I'm going to share with you is a video, because the installation includes not just photographs and objects. Right here you see the entrance as you walk into the installation at James Madison University. I'm going to show you several tableaus. One of them is called the Museum Desk, which you see in the center of the image here, right, from a different angle. And we're going to hone in on that one tableau, which shows a desk covered with, among other things, a book that's upstairs called Our Islands and Their People. This illustration from a 1901 book in which the Star-Spangled Banner is identified as Puerto Rico's flag, an image of newly made Americans at Ponce, right? Here's looking down at the desk, you can see a series of the objects that are on top of the desk, including another version of the Our Islands and Their People book, all sorts of other objects, including other problematic publications such as National Geographic. We're going to switch to a different tableau now called Tools of the Trade. So I've included a series of cameras and typewriters and objects that were actually used by the colonizer to create these, the things in my pretend museum, including right, this little figure of a photographer with a brass plaque that states the camera cannot lie, which accompanies the little white lies jar. Right? Also included in the tableau is caliper for measuring skull sizes, and a skin color chart. I found contemporary echoes of the old stereographs representing stereotypical depictions of families and whatnot. So this is actually a toy you can buy today. Yesterday, Professor Shana Klein showed an image titled Plum Pudding. This happens to be the title of this piece, Plum Pudding, which is makes reference to this old cartoon, but those of you who are Boricuas will understand the reference to the corned beef and the export sodas, right? Here's another piece called A Splendid Little War. At the center of the table is another copy of Our Islands and Their People. That's actually the same edition that's upstairs in the exhibition with toy soldiers crawling all over. Erasure is real, and in 2016, I mentioned earlier, President Obama created signed a bill into Congress that created a fiscal control board, which I consider a financial dictatorship or fiscal dictatorship, which imposes a fiscal control board which has more power than any elected official on the island. And this led me to, it's really one of the things that gave me the impetus to begin this work. And you've seen some of the images, some of the photographs, some of the objects, but there's also video pieces in the installation. And these video pieces are looped. They don't have a beginning, they don't have an end. You just walk in when it starts and you see it until you notice that it's starting to repeat. Unfortunately here, we can't replicate that experience, so there's going to be a beginning, there's going to be an end, especially since we have a time constraint. But I'll show you one of the videos, which is quite fast-paced, and we can discuss some of the content, during the questions if we have time. Okay, so we're gonna.
Once a Spanish colony, Puerto Rico is now a U.S. territory.
Puerto Ricans are U.S. citizens. English is widely spoken. The U.S. dollar is the official currency, and no passport is required.
This is an island surrounded by water, big water, ocean water.
Puerto Rico is kind of a get-out-of-jail-free card.
Becoming a state just means a bigger welfare state. It means a greater incentive not to work.
Don't speak ill of Puerto Rican statehood. So if the topic comes up, just say you support statehood or change the subject.
The appeal of being a state is that so many people don't work.
In New York, we may be the janitors and we may be the maids. In Puerto Rico, the doctors and lawyers are Puerto Rican.
You'll see a strong country. People who work hard to make sure you have a good time.
Que tengan todos muy buenas noches y felicidades a nuestra nueva reina Miss Universe Puerto Rico 2019, Madison Anderson.
Today I want to talk with you about the crisis in Puerto Rico.
All of the murders that are going on in Puerto Rico are 99% drug related. It's either people that owe other drug lords money or there's a bad deal that went wrong, but it's not tourists. It's not people that live here. It's not the gringos.
But the difference is this is an island sitting in the middle of an ocean, and it's a big ocean. It's a very big ocean.
From the bottom of my heart, please help us. Because we're dying here.
It's a war zone. They need help here.
And we weren't treated fairly by the media because we really did a good job.
Have you seen any sign of supplies coming this way?
Zero.
Medicine?
Nothing.
I mean, one example, they had these beautiful soft towels, very good towels.
Why is it that we hear so much from the liberal media that President Trump's racist, he didn't want to help Puerto Ricans because they're brown? Like, we've actually heard that narrative, which is just astounding because we know that's not true.
Yeah, it's completely false.
Now, I hate to tell you, Puerto Rico, but you've thrown our budget a little out of whack.
I would love to see Puerto Rico succeed as a mecca of free market capitalism. Right now, it's a poster child for the failures of socialism.
People of Puerto Rico need to know that they're not forgotten, that they're part of the American family, and Congress's responsiveness to this issue, even though this is not a perfect bill, at least moves us in the right direction. Okay, thank you very much, everybody.
Everybody speaks English. I mean, nobody addresses me. Once I get out of, the gates of the Ritz-Carlton, I go out into a movie theater. They're speaking Spanish.
In resorts, you shouldn't have a problem. But when you're visiting the cities and towns, you're likely to run across a lot of people who don't speak English.
I've been there 17 years doing business there, and I don't speak 2 words of Spanish.
We are also praying for the people of Puerto Rico. We love Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico. And we also love Puerto Rico.
¿Qué progreso están buscando todos ustedes? ¿Qué progreso? Esta lucha que ustedes están lanzando la defensa a todos el pueblo. ¡Somos uno!
Luchar por sacar a la gente corrupta que está en este gobierno, que no merece estar aquí, que no tiene la capacidad ni la inteligencia ni nada para estar dirigiendo este país en estos momentos.
Muchas gracias.
Muchas gracias.
Aloha kako. To me, art is about feeling, both intellectual and visceral. My talk hopefully will contextualize this in relation to Kapulani Landgraf and my H3 photographic essay titled Ē Luku Wale Ē. I'll conclude with an impactful recording of Kapulani's original chant, or kaniko, a dirge mourning the ongoing rampant destruction of the native Hawaiian lands. A brief background. The Interstate H3 is a 16-mile freeway in Hawaii that links the Pearl Harbor Naval Base near Honolulu with the Kaneohe Marine Corps Air Station in Kaneohe, situated on the east coast of Oahu. The original design route was through Moanalua Valley on the Honolulu side, tunneling beneath the Ko'olau Mountains to Haiku Valley on the windward side of Oahu. The proposed highway faced ongoing protests and legal challenges from community groups, including Native Hawaiians, cultural preservationists, and environmentalists who fought to protect sacred sites, rural communities, and Hawaii's cultural heritage and fragile environment. H3 was proposed in 1960 as part of the Statehood Act and the Federal Interstate Highway System, and aimed to create a network of interstate defense highways. Appropriated money was released in 1968 and contracts awarded for the first phase of construction. The construction of H3 was the first in Hawaii to require an environmental impact statement following the National Environmental Policy Act of 1970. In 1974, Moanalua Valley was listed on the National Register of Historic Places. Litigation ensued, and alternate routes were explored, including one through Halawa Valley. Opponents continued their efforts, resulting in injunctions that temporarily halted construction. Litigations by coalitions of various environmental and nonprofit organizations resulted in a 12-year construction delay. However, in 1985, Senator Daniel K. Inouye attached an amendment to a Department of Defense budget bill exempting the freeway from certain environmental laws, thus ending all further litigation and lifting existing injunctions. In 1987, after several drafts and numerous contested case hearings, the third draft EIS was approved. In 1988, construction resumed. In 1984, I was initially hired as a lecturer in photography at Windward Community College. In the spring of 1985, Kapulani Landgraf started taking my classes. By 1989, she had taken all the photo classes the college offered, including several independent study courses. She also worked as my lab assistant. Unbeknownst to each other, on the same Sunday in March 1989, hearing massive earth-moving equipment behind our homes, Kapulani and I separately ventured out to photograph the construction. She photographed from the Makai or ocean side of Kaneohe, and I from the Mauka or mountain side. On Monday, we returned to the photo lab only to discover that we were both interested in documenting the construction. In this case, the ongoing destruction of the land. We decided to collaborate and would spend the next 4 years venturing out together to into the field nearly every Sunday, documenting the process. Our work began in the middle of the long story of H3 and does not purport to be a documentary of the history of H3, but a personal lamentation or elegy. In 1989, on the windward side of Oahu, construction crews were installing the Haiku access road from the Like Like Highway to the foot of the Ko'olau in Haiku. Torrential rain, knee-deep mud, and steep, slippery hills greeted us on our weekly photographic sojourns. From the access road, we watched landscapes transform from rugged inaccessibility into a narrow, snaking passage into the mountain. We saw ridges of green hapu'u ferns, severed, removed, flattened. Over the weeks and months that followed, what seemed like haphazard cutting and filling in of tons of red earth, the devastation slowly became a recognizable plan. With this recognition, our photographs became more controlled. What started out as an almost frantic effort to capture on film a rapidly changing landscape became a more ordered and structured photographic essay of our thoughts, feelings, and observations. By exhibiting our photographs and publishing in the local newspapers, we were attempting to give an alternate view of the Hawaii Department of Transportation's public relations propaganda regarding the protection and preservation of cultural sites. We felt an urgency to reveal to the public the irreversible cultural and environmental damage that the construction was causing. This effort got us temporarily banned from the land by the DOT. That is, until we appealed to the lead H3 contractor who had previously given us permission to photograph. Thankfully, they overrode the DOT, saying that both the DOT and the contractors had their own photographers. Should there be a dispute, it would be a good idea to have a neutral third party's images. In 1990, our first exhibit, H3 Before Luluku, After Haiku, a photographic essay, took place at Ho'omalihia Botanical Garden. To us, this initial exhibition at Ho'omalihia Botanical Garden was important because Ho'omalihia Botanical Garden was instrumental in halting construction, that is, until Senator Inouye's amendment exempting H3 from environmental laws. In 1997, H3 opened to the public. In 1998, we had our culminating show at the now defunct Contemporary Museum at the Advertiser Gallery located on the ground floor of the News Building. That once housed both the Honolulu Star Bulletin and the Honolulu Advertiser. The Advertiser Gallery and newspaper was owned by Thurston Twigsmith, grandson of Lauren A. Thurston, who played a significant role in the overthrow of the Hawaiian Kingdom in 1893. Our exhibit at our exhibit, Ē Luku Wale Ē, Devastation Upon Devastation, Images of Lamentation at the Advertiser Gallery was our protest against colonial thought and exploitation of Hawaii, its land, people, culture, and its sacred sites. Along with our photographs, we exhibited a timeline and a wall of words, excerpts of quotes from local newspapers of officials who over the years dismissed and diminished impacts on the environment and cultural sites despite decades of community protests. In 1997-98, Kapulani Landgraf composed a kanikau, a dirge or lamentation chant, which we included as part of the title frontispiece. For the opening of our exhibition, Lelikala Kame'elehiwa and Ke'eli Igora chanted this first version of Kapulani's kanikau. We installed a recording on a loop to be played for the duration of the show. However, it was often turned off. It would take another 17 years for our book, Ē Luku Wale Ē, to be published. In 2021, Drew Kahu'aina Broderick, one of the curators of the Hawaii Triennial 2022, invited Kapulani and me to reimagine the exhibit Ē Luku Wale Ē, Devastation Upon Devastation at the Hawaii State Art Museum. To conclude my presentation, I would now like to share Kapulani Landgraf's original kanikau as chanted by Lelikala Kame'elehiwa and Ke'eli Igora. Mahalo piha.
Ke mai vai mai tai na ole kumula la nei uli ka ye yo luluku e da bu ala hau ele ka ya o tai a hu le ka na u pa ele ko hana makahala o le naiwa na ua palahina o ke kelela kau eli de mai kau eli ya kawahi pana kapuma kumu pau ka pau e wakane ku pilik I puna ku I pa I ala pau e la ka vai maka u o ilaniwa ke ku pakane o ka oi ka he koko I ke ko a moku o lo Hane na kumu pa I ma eha o lo kamakina e uana kau eli kau mai kau eli kanikapu ka poa ka ikua haulani aina ke ai o buai liuli ke ka buai o la loa ka honua uai hona pue oi de alani kua pue ka wainui o uta Ē Luku Wale Ē E kana kuida wale fo haiku e no idain kuli ali kumai kuli ali o imai lakni o te atuan hoi kama hala vaina wane kaua o kola ua mihima e kani ua na mau kuahimi hiki la kala oni la loala Kela palika ke au kola kuna kalu wale faule ke alnamo kau eli kaumai kau eli
¿La tienes con algo ahí?
Well, thank you so much, José Manuel, Pablo, and Mark, for your presentations. Also incredibly pertinent, not just to the topic of the exhibition, but I think to contemporary history. And so I think I am curious to hear you elaborate a little bit off the cuff, your own impressions, as you look at your work, in this experience of just collaborating together on this artist conversation. We've been in conversation, we've had phone calls, emails, and you've seen each other's presentations, and all three of you address topics that have to do with 1898 or its consequences from three very different perspectives. José Manuel, you from the perspective of that tension between the U.S. intervention, the long-term presence of the United States or influence over Cuba through the Platt Amendment, and the emergence of the Cuban nation. You, Pablo, through that practice that other art historians here in the symposium have talked about in the last 2 days, right, of otherizing the colonial subject, and in particular Puerto Ricans, through imagery and commercial objects, and your incredible generative assemblage of those objects and putting them together in a sort of how did you say, pretend museum, which I like. Performative museum. And then you, Mark, together with Kapulani Landgraf, in terms of the contradictions between, that tension again of the construction of infrastructure serving the military U.S. presence in Hawaii, through the particular example of the H3 stateway has with the destruction of native culture and history and sacred sites. And so I would love to hear you, elaborate a little bit on those differences. How do you see them more than just thinking about your particular presentations, thinking more conceptually about, about what that says about what is important to your particular countries, or the sites where you work from, in your case, Mark, and the consequences of 1898. That was a super long question. I took like 25 minutes. Sorry, it's late,
So you're asking me about the sacred sites and the...
Yeah, more, the way that you each approach these consequences of 1898 is quite different. There's a whole spectrum here, right? There's the othering of the colonial subject, then there are the mythographies around the construction of the nation, what works, what doesn't work, what are the implications of that long-term presence of the U.S. and you, in terms of, well, yes, those implications too, but in terms of infrastructure, in terms of military presence, in terms of a native heritage that is at siege.
Yeah, I think our point of view is resistance. Resistance against losing the language. So we titled our work only in Hawaiian and didn't provide translations. Got a lot of flack for that, but Hawaiian is one of the official languages of Hawaii. So also the using black and white as iconoclastic photos against the tourist photos, travel photos of a beautiful green paradise, which is slowly changing. And the disregard for land, looking at land as a commodity rather than something sacred and something to be preserved and treasured.
One thing, is it working? Yeah. One thing that struck me, Mark, when I was looking at your work and also looking at the installation was that as visual artists we all employ something that's fundamental to the visual arts in our own form of resistance, and that's beauty. I mean, the black and white. I also have done a lot of black and white photography for that specific reason. The book that I did about Trinidad. Trinidad is a country in the Caribbean. The Caribbean is color, right? So, but no, right? Because it allows you to cut through that. But I think that how we each use beauty. I think beauty is an important element in what we do but we use it as a form of resistance in our own way. I think.
Yeah, in my case, I think one of the main things first that arises from the 1898 phenomenon is that a question that 100 and almost 30 years after, or 25 years after, we still ask if we actually owe the independence to the states. Is a very sensitive issue today in Cuba to ask that question.
We just spoke about that.
Well, yeah. And I think there is there are some arguments that conflict on both versions of the history. And but history is just one. So what happened is that we actually had an intervention and we couldn't fulfill the independence by ourselves, and then we had to deal with this bigger power that was the American Empire, and we had the Platt Amendment. and the Platt Amendment ruled the internal politics as well as the external, because we had a bigger master. But what really interests me is that the internal politics was very influenced and very damaged by this, because it's like, in a way, I regret using this comparison of the kid again. But imagine two kids fighting, and one saying to the other, "I'm gonna tell my dad," or "I'm gonna tell." I'm gonna ask the intervention if you don't grant me what I want. So this was for 30-something years. We had only after the first intervention we had only one big intervention, but we had many conflicts along these first 3 decades. And yeah, it was because of the Platt Amendment.
And I really appreciate, Kate and I really appreciate you bringing that up in your work and in your presentation, because I mean, one thing that is not really discussed in the exhibition, a little bit in the catalog, is that movement for annexation from within Cuba, and from the United States as well. Yeah. And so, and then how you speak about you also problematize the Platt Amendment in terms of those who profited from it in Cuba, right? And how it was used, how the power structures established used it to their own advantage for some time. Pablo, could you, maybe we could transition here and speak about something that was, I thought, quite interesting in all 3 presentations in relation to the whole symposium, and it's the idea of violence in imagery, right? And we've seen a lot of very violent images over the course of the last 2 days. I think we can all agree in that, many images that are racist, sexist, full of stereotypes, text accompanying those images. There's also violence in the work you just showed us for all 3 of you. And can you speak about that very different violence that you allude to in your work, or that you even perhaps exert into the image in order to show something?
It's violence, but also trauma, right? And so, how do you deal with that? And because it hurts, right? I mean, violence and trauma are traumatic. It hurts. And so, how do you deal with that? And you live it. You live it. I mean, we have a free country, Cuba. I mean, a nation, a state, and us in limbo still, right? In perpetual in-betweenity. So I don't really have the answer to that, but one for better or for worse, and I'm not saying it's for better. It can certainly be for worse, but one method or one approach is humor. Sad, horrible, painful humor, but it's una forma de bregar, a way to deal with. And so maybe it's sick, maybe that's sick, and maybe that's the result of an accumulation of history and of traumatic continued exposure to this. And so you laugh at things that are really horrible, but how else can you move on? How else can you?
Yeah, in a way, one of the first pieces I presented, the one with the dog, is very ironic and it's like a joke. It's like, this is why I show in the end the actual dog that bit the piece, because this is very common in Cuba, and it's not very it is illegal, but it's not very pursued because the totalitarian regime is quite against many things. They illegalize many things. We don't have lottery. We don't have many things. But by the other way, we say that in Cuba we have a way of calling this por la izquierda. It means like on the down low. It doesn't really mean the left, as in political affiliation, whatever. And so they kind of tolerate these many things of the underground culture, as the fighting dogs that are walking the streets, bleeding, whatever. It's very obvious. And this violence, this sort of barbarian reality lives along with other prospects of the project of the revolution that is very moralist in many ways, and is a big hypocrisy in many ways. And this is just an example. It's not the best example.
Then there's also that contradiction between, in your work, you know, the violence of certain historical photographs that you're using, such as the photographs of the corpses, or if you will, the martyred revolutionaries, in contrast with the beauty of the relics that you bring about as apocryphal objects, or sort of objects around which you construct the mythology of the nation and of the. Can you speak to that tension there, to that dichotomy?
Me perdí un poco, disculpa, pero la relación de la violencia.
Sí, that pairing you do, you know, of historical images that are very violent together with the objects you bring about, which are almost like sacred.
Yeah, I would jump and say that we kind of inherit that from the Catholic tradition, that history is depicted in a relic-like, in the church. The relics of the saints and stuff are presented in a very religious way. So you go to Cuban museums and these pieces are still like, this was from Maceo, this was from Martí, this was, this comes from the 19th century, the locks of hair from the dead patriots and stuff. And there's a lot of beauty in that, a lot of poetry, but a lot of violence. It's very tragic in many ways, our history.
Okay.
Yeah, our photos show the violence of the land, the raping of the land, and this is a continuum of the early sugar plantations. And then when sugar failed because of lack of water, then they planted pineapple, which then failed because of, on the windward side, because of disease. Then they took the water from, like they did on Maui, they took the water from the windward side to the leeward dry side. And in Maui's case, they took in Lahaina, which was our marshy land, they took it and they totally dried it out. And Kapulani and I, as Piliāmoʻo, worked on also water issues. And we finally, through Repun and against Hawaii, I think it was, finally got the Board of Water to return some of the water back to Kaneohe Bay, thus not only restoring some of the streams, but restoring the bay itself, somewhat. We still need more water into the bay.
So the work, or you said that the work had a direct impact then on restitution, or?
Yeah, definitely, restitution, and then restitution and trying to restore the land, to try to repair, and which is definitely a result of statehood and the overthrow. And we also reacted to the Big Five, which again control the water, control the land, massive areas of land.
Thank you. Pablo, you were going to say something, and then maybe we can go to questions.
Oh, I was just going to make a quick comment because I was so struck by your titling of the works in the Native Hawaiian language. It brings us the question of language, and here we are, all of us speaking the language of the colonizer, right? But I wanted to add, and I was going to start my talk with this, but I decided not to in the interest of time. But I learned from traveling to Puerto Limón, Costa Rica. I don't know if any of you have been to Puerto Limón, Costa Rica, but the English can also be a language of resistance, because in Puerto Limón, most of the population is West Indian, and their English language was suppressed by the Spanish-speaking authorities from San Jose, and people from Puerto Limón, who are mostly black, were not allowed to travel to San Jose, Costa Rica without a card, just like in apartheid South Africa. So English can be the language of resistance too. And so I just think I'd like to make an argument for fluidity.
I do think that English is a language of resistance when you say La Avenida Roosevelt, you know, for Avenue.
And Spanglish is a language of resistance too, right?
So do we have questions? Can you please go to the mic? Yes.
Oh.
How's that? Okay, I'll take over here. Thank you for all your presentations. It was very emotional. So if there's a little quiver in my voice, it's just I'm reacting to that. But something that struck me about all of your work, and I of course know some of it better than others, some of your work better than others, was the way in which you communicate on different levels, I think, to different audiences, and in using text, language, photographs, objects, installation, irony, humor, wit. And I'm just wondering, double entendres, if you can each of you maybe speak a little bit about how you might be communicating to different audiences and how maybe different audiences may be responding to your work. If you could share some of that with us, that would be great. Thank you.
I can give a fast answer because I use, for example, images of Lolita Lebron, who to non-Puerto Rican audiences is just an attractive-looking woman looking fiercely in the camera, but Boricuas will know who Lolita Lebron is, right? And in the piece that I showed called Plum Pudding, the significance of corned beef, right? Corned beef and the export sodas will be very different, be read in a very different way by a Puerto Rican audience than someone who just will look at that, oh, what does that mean, right? So it operates on different levels and what you bring to it.
In my case, this is a problem I face constantly in my work because young generations in Cuba don't care about history. There is a big, how would you say, cansancio, exhaustion about the history, in part because the state has exploited much of its meaning in order to legitimate itself. And we could see in 2018 how they were launching this kind of propaganda campaign because we had a close anniversary of the first war of independence. I would have to do the math, maybe 100 and something years, and the propaganda said one revolution since the 1868 till Castro, and so in a way history is very alive, but used by the power, but it's not alive in the people. People, of course, knows Martí, Maceo, Gomez, but no more than that. They don't even care about Martí. Most of the young generations, and my way in a way, because at first it's a personal past, tries in a way to show my passion about this part of the history with its lights and shadows, and I try in my work to make, for example, publications to explain many of the things I produce, because many people don't get. I'm talking about Cubans. Imagine foreigners. They don't get many of the stories I'm dealing with.
I think our work can be looked at environmentally. You can see the great. This is before they were required to catch the sediment before it goes into the bay, and then also on another level, the picture of the tire iron. That was referring to the newspapers or the DOT propaganda saying that they were going to, and this is at the sacred site, one of the most sacred sites, Kukuio Kane, which was a heiau or a temple, the most important sacred site in Kaneohe, and they were going to bulldoze it, or then, at first they said it wasn't a sacred site, then it was finally, the archaeologists finally said, it was, so then they're going to preserve it in place, and they're going to preserve it by covering it up, and they were going to put in remote sensing devices. So after they covered it up with tons of gravel, then some other later generation in 1,000 years from now can maybe find it and uncover it and discover this sacred site.
Wow.
Can I add just one thing very quickly? For me, this is not a problem. For me, it's a strategy. It's an empowering strategy because it gives a Boricua audience an in to this material that others won't understand. And I'm not against others understanding it, but I think empowering us is important.
Yeah. Yeah, I would like if everyone could reflect on the following. Art aestheticizes violence. If you could comment on that and how it's just that's one. The other is how colonialism is a form of environmental destruction.
Okay. Any quick thoughts? To art is a, what did you say?
Art aestheticizes violence.
Art aestheticizes violence. Let's talk about that quickly. Trying to figure out a boom answer.
Well, in our case, Piliāmoʻo, we used very high-end aesthetic black and white images to create violent images of destruction of the land. But in order to do that, it was more seductive to try and bring in people to actually look at the work in more detail, rather than a color photograph where you can see it within a fraction of a second. So depending on its use, I mean, I think aestheticizing violence could be a good thing, but it could be a bad thing too. I mean, like war photographs, that's perhaps the ultimate use of that term. Right?
might be critical. I think who is creating the art, yes.
And for what purpose?
And for what purpose, right. And so that makes me think about The Conquerors, one of the last paintings in the exhibition, which depicts the building of the Panama Canal. And it's a fabulous painting. It's a loan from the Met by Jonas Lai, a Scandinavian artist who was here in the United States and went to witness the construction of the Panama Canal after watching a documentary and finding it fascinating, and produced all these images. It's called The Conquerors, which is an incredible title, and it does depict that very, violent act of breaking through the land to build this massive engineering project to, culminate that project of U.S. expansionism and sea power. So your work, I think, and Kapulani's is exactly sort of a counterpoint to that, the other face. Thank you very much, artists, for being here, for offering your perspectives and sharing your work with us. And thank you, everyone, and see you in 15 minutes for the last panel.